What will happen to Donald Trump if U.S. layoffs surge to record levels? Imagine a political storm brewing at the very heart of America's economy. Layoffs are climbing to record highs. Families are tightening their belts, and uncertainty is spreading through every sector. In moments like this, the spotlight inevitably falls on one man, Donald Trump. For years, he branded himself as the ultimate deal maker and a champion of American workers. But what happens to that image if unemployment spikes and job insecurity defines the national mood? Will his base still see him as the savior of U.S. industry, or will voters start questioning whether his policies are fueling the very crisis they fear? The stakes could not be higher, and the political consequences might be devastating. Stay tuned as we break it down right now. The question of how Donald Trump's political and personal trajectory might be affected if U.S. layoffs surge to record levels is one of the most pressing in American politics today. Employment, more than almost any other indicator, shapes both the economic reality of millions of Americans and the political fortunes of presidents and former presidents. Jobs touch every household, influence voter perceptions of leadership, and can rapidly transform political landscapes. For Donald Trump, a figure who has consistently framed himself as a champion of economic revival and prosperity, a wave of unprecedented layoffs would present both risks and opportunities. To understand the potential consequences, it is necessary to evaluate historical precedents, economic dynamics, political strategy, public opinion, and Trump's own unique brand of political communication. History provides powerful lessons about how economic crises and job losses affect political leaders. Herbert Hoover's presidency was defined and destroyed by the Great Depression, despite the global roots of the crisis. Jimmy Carter, despite achievements in foreign policy, saw his re-election chances collapse under the weight of stagflation and unemployment. George H.W. Bush lost re-election in 1992 largely because of a mild recession, even as recovery had already begun by Election Day. These cases illustrate a key reality. Presidents and former presidents are judged not by the fairness of economic circumstances, but by their proximity to them. When jobs vanish, leadership is held accountable. If the Trump era or its aftermath is marked by record layoffs, Trump's identity as a businessman and self-proclaimed economic steward would be severely tested. From his first campaign in 2016, Trump positioned himself as a jobs president. He promised to restore manufacturing, revive coal, and negotiate trade deals that favored American workers. His rallies often featured testimonials from individuals who credited him with saving their livelihoods. The "Make America Great Again" slogan was deeply tied to the promise of abundant, well-paying jobs. If layoffs now surge to record levels, this brand narrative would be challenged at its core. Trump has repeatedly claimed unique economic competence, presenting himself as a builder, negotiator, and deal-maker whose personal skills translate into national prosperity. Job losses would therefore be interpreted not as a random event, but as a direct contradiction of his central political identity. Recent data already show troubling signs. Companies announced just 1,494 new jobs in August, the lowest since 2009. Layoffs surged 39% to nearly 86,000. Housing data reveals the largest imbalance ever recorded between sellers and buyers. These figures, while not definitive of a long-term trend, create anxiety among households and policymakers alike. If these patterns accelerate, the narrative of economic insecurity will dominate headlines. Trump's opponents will frame him as incapable of delivering stability, while his supporters will attempt to shift blame to external factors. The contest over interpretation will be as critical as the data itself. Trump and his allies may argue that layoffs are temporary, caused by global instability or Federal Reserve caution, rather than presidential policy. If this narrative sticks, Trump may soften the political damage. If layoffs persist month after month, the sense of decline could harden into public consensus. Once voters associate Trump with job losses, reversing that perception will be extremely difficult, especially within the compressed timeline of an election year. If layoffs surge alongside housing market imbalance and corporate losses, the United States could enter a structural recession. In such a scenario, Trump's economic stewardship could be seen as fundamentally flawed, reshaping the 2024 and 2028 political landscapes. Polls consistently show that economic conditions rank as the #1 concern for voters. Recent surveys reveal that more than 60% of Americans believe prices are rising, despite Trump's claims to the contrary. If layoffs confirm this perception of economic insecurity, disapproval ratings will deepen. Moreover, polling suggests that Democratic figures such as California Governor Gavin Newsom could outperform Trump in head-to-head matchups if elections were held today. Record layoffs would only amplify this trend as voters seek alternative leadership. In an era of fragmented media, narratives around layoffs will spread rapidly. Trump's critics in mainstream outlets will highlight stories of families losing jobs, mortgages collapsing, and communities hollowed out. His allies in conservative media will emphasize global causes, government regulators, or even cultural scapegoats. Trump himself will likely attempt to dominate the conversation through his social media presence. Past behavior suggests he will mix denial, deflection, and direct appeals to his supporters for financial contributions. Yet if personal stories of hardship dominate news cycles, even Trump's formidable communication skills may falter. If faced with record layoffs, Trump would need to present tangible policy measures. Options could include tax cuts, deregulation, infrastructure spending, or trade renegotiations. However, his credibility would depend on whether voters believe these measures can produce results quickly enough. Trump may also be tempted to pivot attention toward foreign policy crises or cultural battles, redirecting public focus from economic pain. Historically, leaders under economic stress often amplify national security or identity issues. Whether this strategy would succeed depends on how deeply job losses are felt at the household level. During Trump's first term, the economy experienced growth prior to the pandemic, but critics argue it was fueled by deficit spending and tax cuts favoring the wealthy. When COVID-19 struck, unemployment soared to record levels, briefly erasing job gains. Trump's opponents will remind voters of this precedent, framing him as vulnerable to economic shocks. If record layoffs now emerge under a second Trump administration or during his continued political influence, it may reinforce the idea that his policies lack durability. The argument would be that prosperity under Trump is fragile, easily disrupted, and unsustainable. Economic downturns at home often affect international relations. Trump has already been criticized for ambushing European allies during critical meetings and for posting symbolic images of closeness with Vladimir Putin. If U.S. layoffs surge, allies may question America's stability, while rivals may sense opportunity. Trade partners, particularly those affected by tariffs, will also factor layoffs into their negotiations. If U.S. companies such as John Deere predict losses due to tariffs, the link between Trump's trade policies and domestic job insecurity will grow more visible. Beyond economics, mass layoffs reshape social fabric. Communities reliant on single industries may see rising despair, substance abuse, and political polarization. Trump has often drawn support from areas hit hardest by deindustrialization. Record layoffs could either deepen loyalty to him, as he is seen as a voice of grievance, or trigger disillusionment if promises remain unfulfilled. The way Trump addresses these human consequences will determine whether he consolidates his base or faces erosion. His challenge is to balance empathy with effective policy, a task that has historically tested leaders in times of economic pain. Presidential legacies are often defined less by rhetoric than by outcomes. Hoover, Carter, and Bush remain associated with economic struggles decades later. If Trump becomes linked in public memory to record layoffs, his legacy could be one of instability rather than prosperity. Conversely, if he manages to navigate the crisis, present effective solutions, and restore confidence, he could reinforce his narrative of resilience. The stakes, therefore, are not only immediate electoral outcomes, but the broader arc of historical reputation. Layoffs affect not only Trump personally, but also the broader Republican Party. Candidates in congressional and gubernatorial races will be forced to respond to local job losses, often distancing themselves from or aligning with Trump, depending on their constituencies. Democrats will likely highlight the contrast between economic insecurity and their own policy proposals for health care, housing, and labor rights. Independents, who often swing elections, may be especially sensitive to job-related anxiety. Record layoffs would reignite debates about the social safety net, unemployment insurance, retraining programs, and the role of government in managing the economy. Trump's position on these issues will be scrutinized. Critics may argue that his focus on deregulation and tax policy neglects the real needs of displaced workers. Supporters may counter that government intervention risks prolonging downturns. The debate will shape not only Trump's fortunes, but also the direction of American economic policy for years to come. If U.S. layoffs surge to record levels, Donald Trump faces one of the most profound challenges of his political career. His brand as a champion of jobs would be under siege, his polling numbers vulnerable, and his legacy at stake. History shows that leaders rarely escape the political consequences of mass unemployment. The question is whether Trump can adapt, present credible solutions, and convince voters that he remains the best steward of American prosperity. In the end, the outcome will depend not only on economic data, but on perception, narrative, and leadership. For Trump, the stakes could not be higher. The survival of his political project, the stability of his party, and his place in the history of American economic governance.